Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I never really planned on being the Thanksgiving doormat. It just sort of happened. The way a slow leak happens under your kitchen sink. You don't notice it at first, not until the cabinets start to smell and the floor warps. Year after year, it built up. Small expectations piled on my back until I could barely stand straight. At first, it was a favor, just a one-time thing when Mom was recovering from her knee surgery and couldn't host. Then Mark and Leanne had babies, and Aunt Doris insisted she was just too tired these days. And suddenly, by some silent family vote that I was never invited to, it became my job. Every November, like clockwork, they'd start dropping hints by Halloween. So, what's on the menu this year, hon? Mom would chirp in that voice of hers that always made me feel like I was 12 years old again, fumbling through a piano recital. Or Mark would say, "You're still good to host, right? We've got that soccer tournament the week before, and, well, you know how busy we are with the kids." Meanwhile, Leanne would act like she was offering me a favor just by showing up. "I'll bring the sparkling cider," she said one year, as if that alone absolved her from lifting a damn finger. It wasn't just cooking a turkey. It was scrubbing the baseboards because Aunt Doris had a nasty little habit of running her finger along surfaces to check for dust. It was hauling a 25-pound frozen bird up 3 flights of stairs to my condo because the elevator broke down every other week. It was spending $300 I didn't have on groceries, folding chairs, and tablecloths because God forbid anyone eat off paper plates in this family. It was arranging flowers, setting the good table, burning my hand trying to mash potatoes, and smiling through it all while they arrived late, half-assed their hugs, complained the stuffing was too dry, and left their dirty plates stacked in my sink like a damn leaning tower of shame. I used to tell myself it was temporary. I told myself that next year, things would be different. Next year, someone else would step up. Next year, they'd appreciate me. But 11 years later, guess what? Still me. Still cooking. Still smiling while my so-called loved ones treated me like the unpaid help. And the worst part? They didn't even think they were being cruel. No, to them, it was just natural. I was single, no kids, no real family to worry about, so obviously, I had the time. As if my life, my time, my sanity wasn't real because I didn't have a husband and a mortgage and PTA meetings clogging up my calendar. I hosted Thanksgiving for 12 years. No, wait, it was 10. Well, math's not my thing, but you get the idea. Point is, it was a long damn time. Long enough that resentment turned from a whisper in the back of my mind to a full-blown roar I couldn't ignore anymore. And it wasn't just about Thanksgiving. Not really. It was about every birthday party I planned, but never got one in return. Every text I sent that went unanswered until they needed a favor. Every time I swallowed my pride and said, "Sure, happy to help," when what I really wanted to say was, "Help your damn self." I remember last year so vividly it makes my teeth ache. I burned the sweet potatoes because I was too busy wiping up cranberry sauce my nephew flung onto the wall. Mom laughed, called it cute, and then wondered aloud why the house smelled like something was on fire. Mark spent the entire dinner bitching about his job, never once asking me how mine was going. Leanne scrolled on her phone at the table, ignoring her kids who were using my living room like a personal trampoline park. And Aunt Doris, bless her shriveled heart, told me my turkey was a little dry compared to how Mom used to make it. After they left, I stood alone in my trashed kitchen, staring at the mountain of dishes and half-eaten pies, and something inside me cracked. Not snapped like a twig, not shattered like a wine glass dropped on tile, no, it cracked like a damn fault line deep underground. A slow, tectonic shift. I realized they weren't going to change. Not ever. And if I wanted anything different, it had to be me. I had to be the one to change. Not them. They were too comfortable, too selfish, too oblivious. So, sometime in late January, after weeks of replaying Thanksgiving over and over in my mind like a bad movie on repeat, I made a decision. A quiet one. No dramatic announcements, no teary declarations. I was just done. No more hosting. No more cooking. No more setting the table while everyone else sat on their asses. And the best part? I wasn't going to tell them. I was going to let them crash into the brick wall of their own entitlement at full speed. I didn't need to rage or slam doors or write angry Facebook posts. Revenge, I realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is just walking away and letting people choke on their own expectations. But this year, they were in for one hell of a surprise. Booking that trip to Arizona felt like buying my soul back from the devil, and I remember sitting there at my rickety kitchen table with my laptop glowing like a doorway to another life, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The resort wasn't fancy. God knows I couldn't afford fancy, but it had a pool, a real palm tree garden, and a little patio where I could drink coffee without anyone asking me to get up and find a missing toy or refill a wine glass. I clicked confirm reservation with a strange mix of guilt, terror, and giddy excitement rolling around in my chest like a bunch of angry marbles. I didn't tell anyone, not a soul, not even my best friend Janine, because knowing her, she would have accidentally blurted it out at brunch, and then the whole plan would have gone to hell before it even got started. I played along like nothing had changed, smiled and nodded when Leon called me in early November, saying, "We'll be there around 2, like usual, right?" And I answered, of course, same as every year, with a sweetness that tasted like battery acid on my tongue. Mark texted me the week before, asking if I needed anything from Costco, which was laughable considering the man hadn't brought more than a half-empty bottle of cheap wine in years. But again, I lied right through my teeth and said, "Nope, I'm all good. Just bring yourselves." I packed my bags 2 days before Thanksgiving, stuffing in my beat-up bathing suit, my favorite paperback novel with the coffee stains on page 52, a floppy sun hat I hadn't worn since college, and enough sunscreen to make a lifeguard proud. I hid the suitcase in the back of my closet behind the box of Christmas decorations, just in case one of them decided to drop by unannounced with some half-assed excuse like I was just in the neighborhood. The night before I left, I went around the house lighting those little battery-powered candles you can buy at the dollar store because I read somewhere that if a burglar thinks someone's home, they're less likely to break in. It felt stupid at first, sneaking around my own living room like a teenager covering up a party, but then I realized how much I didn't trust my family not to show up uninvited, not because they missed me or cared, but because they just expect me to be there, apron tied, oven hot, turkey basted to oblivion. The guilt gnawed at me in the quiet moments, of course it did, because no matter how much we tell ourselves we're right, there's always that little voice in the back of our heads whispering about loyalty and duty and how families are supposed to stick together. I remembered all those Thanksgivings when I smiled through a cracked rib from a bad fall or stirred gravy while fighting off the stomach flu because, God forbid, I let anyone else take the reins. I thought about the year Aunt Doris loudly complained to everyone that my mashed potatoes were lumpy while I was in the bathroom wiping away tears, pretending it was just the onions that got me. I thought about last year when Mom asked me, within earshot of half the family, why I hadn't found a nice man yet, as if my life were some sad little waiting room for real happiness to begin. It wasn't just about a turkey dinner, and deep down I knew that. It was about a pattern that had sunk its claws into me years ago, a pattern where my needs, my plans, my life always came dead last behind their wants, their expectations, their sheer inability to see me as a full person with dreams bigger than setting out the damn gravy boat on time. And it made me wonder how many holidays I had sacrificed at that altar without even realizing it, how many times I had said yes when everything inside me screamed no. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe they'd sit around the table this year cursing my name between mouthfuls of dry stuffing and burnt rolls. Maybe they'd say I ruined Thanksgiving. But maybe, just maybe, I'd finally taste what freedom was like, and maybe it would be so sweet I'd never want to come back. I set my alarm for 5 in the morning, knowing full well they would start texting me by 9 at the latest, once they realized there were no smells of roasting turkey wafting down the hall. No frantic last-minute calls asking if someone could pick up extra whipped cream. I tucked my boarding pass into the back pocket of my jeans, my fingers brushing over it like it was some kind of magic talisman. I crawled into bed with my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe, not from fear anymore, but from a savage kind of hope I hadn't let myself feel in years. Lying there in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the fake candles, I realized just how much of my life I had spent waiting for things to get better, waiting for them to notice, waiting for some grand gesture that would never come. Not this year. Not anymore. I had no idea their panic would uncover secrets I wasn't ready to hear, secrets that would make me wonder if walking away was the beginning of my freedom, or the start of something even messier than I ever imagined. Thanksgiving morning broke with a strange and delicious kind of silence, the kind of silence I hadn't heard in over a decade, no frantic alarms ringing in my ears, no last-minute grocery lists being scribbled on scraps of mail, no marathon of washing, chopping, stirring, and roasting waiting to devour my whole damn day. I lay there for a moment in bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, feeling like a kid playing hooky, half expecting someone to barge in and scold me back into line, but no one came, and the only sound was the faint whir of the cheap ceiling fan. I made myself coffee, real slow, savoring the smell of it, leaning against the counter in my kitchen that, for once, was not buried under bags of stuffing mix and towers of canned cranberry sauce. I had just sat down at the little table with my chipped white mug when the buzzing started, that sharp, aggressive vibration of my phone skittering across the wood like a trapped insect, and, even before I picked it up, I knew exactly what was waiting for me on the other side. First, it was Mark, of course it was, his text practically oozing entitlement. "Hey, what time should we come by?" No question if I was ready, no polite checking in, just the assumption that of course the door would be open and the food would be hot and his throne would be waiting. A minute later came Leanne, in her usual martyr style, typing out, "Do you need us to bring anything?" like it was some grand favor, a saintly offering for which I should grovel at her feet. I didn't reply. I just sipped my coffee, watching the little notification bubbles stack up higher and higher on my screen like a digital tower of impending doom. By 9:30, the texts had turned into calls, first Mom, then Aunt Doris, then Mark again, each one ringing louder and longer as if the sheer force of their panic could drag me back to the kitchen in an apron and oven mitts. By 10 o'clock, the tone of the messages shifted, the cheerful confusion giving way to something darker, more frantic, sharp edges cutting through their words like broken glass. Mark left a voicemail that started out fake casual, "Hey, just checking in, no rush," but ended with a sharp, clipped, "Where the hell are you?" That made me laugh out loud right there at my little table. Leanne's second text was pure guilt, written in that half-sweet, half-dagger style she had perfected since high school. "It's not just about us, you know. The kids are so excited to see you. They're going to be heartbroken." As if her kids even knew who I was beyond, the lady who makes pie and doesn't yell when they jump on the couch. Mom's voice, when she finally got through on the third call, was the worst, syrupy and trembling, pulling out the big guns. "Sweetheart, I just don't understand what's going on. This isn't like you. Family comes first. It's Thanksgiving, for God's sake. Family comes first." That old, tired sword they liked to swing at me, the blade they thought would slice right through my resolve. When the gate agent called boarding for my flight to Arizona, I stood up, stretching my arms high over my head, feeling the unfamiliar ache of muscles that weren't sore from scrubbing a bathroom or hauling a turkey. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, one final desperate volley, and for reasons I still can't explain, I answered it, thumbing the green circle with a strange kind of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life from a seat way up in the nosebleeds. Mark's voice was a roar in my ear before I could even say hello. "Where the hell are you?" He barked, his anger rattling the bones in my hand. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to Mom? To the whole family? Jesus, you can't just bail after everything we've covered for you. Covered for me." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the breath out of my lungs, and I stood there in the middle of Gate 12, frozen, my boarding pass crumpling slightly in my sweaty palm. My mouth opened, but nothing came out, my mind a hurricane of confusion, anger, and the sudden terrifying suspicion that I didn't know the full story, not by a long shot. Covered for me. What the hell did that mean? I had spent 11, no, 12, well, hell, however many damn years, busting my ass for this family, being the responsible one, the dependable one, the invisible scaffold that kept the whole teetering structure from collapsing. And now he had the audacity to throw that line at me like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Sorry, I'm boarding now, I said, my voice shockingly calm, like I was reading off a weather report, not detonating a bomb. Good luck figuring it out. I hung up before he could spew anything else, before he could twist the knife deeper. As I handed my ticket to the agent and stepped through the gate, my heart jackhammering against my ribs, the full weight of what had just happened finally started to settle into my bones. Whatever I thought I knew about my family, about their manipulations and their pettiness, about their quiet little betrayals, was only the surface. There were deeper cracks running underneath it all, cracks that had been papered over for years with gravy boats and fake smiles and forced family photos nobody really wanted to take. I stood there frozen at gate 12, my boarding pass in hand, my world suddenly tilting sideways, and for the first time in my life, I realized that maybe I hadn't just walked away from a holiday. Maybe, without even meaning to, I had walked straight into the truth. The flight to Arizona felt like a blur stitched together with bad coffee, scratchy airline seats, and the constant hum of questions that gnawed at the edges of my mind, refusing to be ignored no matter how tightly I shut my eyes or blasted the in-flight movie at full volume. I kept replaying Mark's words in my head, like a broken record I couldn't rip from the player, the phrase after everything we've covered for you wrapping around my brain like barbed wire. I knew there was something I wasn't seeing, something rotten hiding just below the surface of all those Thanksgivings spent breaking my back while they smiled and nodded and handed me another dirty dish. By the time the plane touched down in the brittle desert air of Arizona, the questions had fermented into something heavier, something poisonous that sat in my gut like a stone. I checked into the little resort, accepted my keycard from a bored teenager at the front desk, and dragged my suitcase into the beige, cookie-cutter room where everything smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and desperation. I dropped my bag, sat on the lumpy bed, and let the memories start flooding in, each one sharp and jagged, like pieces of glass I had been too tired, or too blind, to see before. It was 3 years ago, the Thanksgiving that first felt off, though at the time I hadn't had the energy to figure out why. Mark showed up late, as usual, but this time he was twitchy, sweaty, talking too fast and drinking too much wine even before the turkey hit the table. I remember how Mom had fluttered around him like a nervous bird, laughing too loudly at his bad jokes, constantly refilling his glass, smoothing over every awkward silence with frantic energy that felt so out of place I almost asked if she was on something. Leanne wasn't much better that year, sitting stiff and pale at the table, barely touching her plate, her eyes darting around the room like she was trapped in a cage. She kept snapping at her kids, who were wired and wild, knocking over drinks and shrieking underfoot, but instead of her usual exasperated sighs, her voice was thin and sharp, brittle enough that even Aunt Doris raised an eyebrow over her highball glass. Now, sitting alone in that sad little hotel room, I pieced it together with the slow horror of someone realizing the monster was under the bed the whole time. That was the year Mark's business restructured, the year he transitioned to new opportunities, which sounded suspicious even then, but I had been too busy brining turkeys and ironing napkins to ask any real questions. I remembered how Mom had insisted on handling all the food expenses that year, brushing off my protests with fake cheer, and how she had shown up early, arms full of grocery bags, her hands shaking just slightly when she thought I wasn't looking. He had stolen from the family business, Mom's retirement accounts, to be more specific, and rather than face the humiliation, the legal nightmare, the shame that would ripple through the whole family tree, they circled the wagons and decided to keep it quiet. Mark stayed out of jail, Mom kept her reputation, and everyone agreed to pretend that nothing had happened. Everyone except me, of course, the one idiot too busy making place cards and homemade cranberry sauce to notice the damn house was on fire. Then there was 2 years ago when Leon cracked. I should have seen it then too, the way she barely managed to keep her mask on through dinner, her hands trembling so bad she dropped an entire platter of sweet potatoes onto the carpet and burst into tears. Everyone rushed to blame the stress of the holidays, but now I realize it was so much worse than that. She had a full-blown nervous breakdown that summer, checked herself into a facility for what Mom insisted was just exhaustion, and instead of letting the truth breathe, instead of allowing her to heal without shame, they papered over it with a thick, suffocating layer of denial. We didn't talk about it. We didn't even hint at it. We just smiled tighter, poured more wine, and passed the damn gravy like good little robots. And Aunt Doris, God bless her hypocritical soul, was on the verge of losing her house thanks to some shady real estate scheme she'd fallen into, desperate for a little excitement after retiring. She kept showing up to Thanksgiving wearing pearls and plastic smiles, making snide comments about my life choices, while her own was hanging by a thread. It all made sense now, the way they clung to those traditions with such desperate, talon-like grips, needing me to keep the surface polished and pretty so no one would dare scratch too deep. I wasn't hosting Thanksgiving all those years because they loved me or appreciated me or even because they thought I did it best. I was the goddamn distraction. I was the shiny, well-roasted bird on the table that kept the rest of the world from seeing the mold growing in the walls. As long as I kept the centerpieces fresh and the mashed potatoes fluffy, nobody had to face the rot festering under the floorboards of our perfect little family gatherings. All those years I thought I was being loved for my efforts, being needed for my kindness, being valued for showing up when no one else would, but really, I was just the smokescreen. They needed me to keep hosting because if I ever stopped, if I ever dared to let the cracks show, the whole sorry illusion would come crashing down around them like a rotten old barn in a storm. And for 11 years, I was their fool. Their smiling, apron-wearing, turkey-basting fool. Too damn loyal or too damn blind to see I wasn't saving Thanksgiving, I was saving them from themselves. The plane climbed steadily into the sky, leaving behind the gray, wet chill of home, carrying me toward something warm and unknown, and as the clouds swallowed the city below, I felt something inside me lift for the first time in years. Something heavy and sour that I had carried so long I forgot it was even there. I sat by the window, forehead pressed lightly to the cold glass, feeling the engines hum through my bones, and for the first time since I could remember, I did not feel the gnawing anxiety of a list half done, a meal half cooked, a table half set. The woman next to me was reading a paperback novel, her legs tucked up under her, and the smell of airline peanuts and stale coffee drifted through the cabin, but I barely noticed, too wrapped up in the quiet roar of my own mind. I thought about all the years I had bent over backwards, twisting myself into shapes so unnatural that even the people closest to me didn't recognize them as contortions anymore. They just called it love, or duty, or family, and expected me to keep folding until I snapped. I thought about those Thanksgivings when I scrubbed until my knuckles bled, when I smiled until my cheeks ached, when I sat at the end of the table, exhausted and invisible, listening to my family talk over me like I was the hired help. I thought about the endless parade of excuses, the lazy apologies, the way they tossed words like loyalty and love around like grenades, not caring who got hit so long as they didn't have to feel anything real themselves. At some point during the flight, maybe an hour in, maybe 3, I smiled, really smiled, and it wasn't for anyone else's benefit, wasn't a reflex, wasn't a mask. It was small, it was crooked, it was a little painful, like using a muscle that had long since atrophied, but it was mine, and it was real, and it felt like a kind of quiet revolution inside my chest. The pilot announced our descent into Arizona just as the sun was starting to slide down the horizon, painting the desert in those ridiculous, show-off colors that look fake until you see them for yourself. Deep oranges, bloody purples. That aching kind of pink that feels like it could break your heart if you let it. I watched it all unfold through the tiny airplane window, my heart thudding steady and sure against my ribs, and I knew, deep down in the place you don't lie to yourself, that I had made the right choice, no matter how much it stung. My phone started buzzing before we even taxied to the gate, a frantic vibration against my leg that I ignored at first, soaking in the last rays of sunset like a woman dying of thirst, but eventually. Curiosity or habit, or maybe just a stubborn streak I hadn't killed yet made me dig it out of my pocket and look. The notification scrolled endlessly across the screen, text after text, voicemail after voicemail. A digital flood of everything I had known was coming and still wasn't ready for. Mom's messages started out syrupy and wounded, all soft guilt and sharp-edged sadness. Lines like, "We're so worried about you, sweetheart," and "This isn't like you. Please call us." Leanne's messages were a masterclass in martyrdom. Paragraphs about how the kids were crying, how Mark was furious, how Mom had been in tears all morning, how Thanksgiving was ruined, and it was all so unnecessary. Aunt Doris, ever the charmer, skipped straight to the jugular with a text that read, "Selfish people die alone," followed immediately by a follow-up that said, "Sent that by accident, but still true." Mark, of course, couldn't resist a few shots of his own. Texts filled with half-threats, half-pleas, warnings about how Mom's health was fragile, how people were talking, how if I didn't come home soon, I'd regret it. It was like watching them all scramble to rebuild a house of cards I had kicked over with one small, decisive movement, and the funny thing was, the longer I watched them flail, the lighter I felt. Like every desperate buzz of my phone peeled another heavy layer off my skin. The final message came just as I was standing in line for the rental car, a simple text from Mom that read, "You ruined everything." No anger, no explanation, no apology. Just those 3 words, sitting on my screen like a final, heavy stone dropped into an already sinking ship. I stared at it for a long minute, the line shuffling forward without me, and then I locked the phone and slid it deep into my bag, not even bothering to answer. Because the thing was, I hadn't ruined anything. I hadn't set the fires that burned down our family's lies. I hadn't stolen or lied, or covered up truths so dark they rotted everyone they touched. I just stopped being the patsy. I just stopped carrying their secrets on my back like a damn pack mule. If they thought the illusion breaking was my fault, that said more about the house they built than it did about the wind that knocked it down. Driving through the desert with the windows down, the air sharp and clean in my lungs, the stars beginning to prick the darkening sky, I let myself breathe in the silence, let myself be nobody's host, nobody's scapegoat, nobody's second choice. I did not know if I would ever forgive them, if someday the wound would harden into a scar I could touch without wincing, or if the whole mess would stay raw and bloody forever. I didn't know if I would call them next week, next month, next year, or if this break would stretch on and on until it became permanent, another line drawn in the sand that no one dared cross. But as I watched the desert sun sink below the horizon, I realized something they never expected. I was never coming back to that table.